Yes, you need to put, apparently you need to put the headsets on. Thank you. So just before so I'll introduce myself. I'm Iain Gulland. I'm the Chief Executive of Zero Waste Scotland. I have a panel of people. We're going to have a discussion, and but before I introduce the panel and we get into the kind of chat, I'd like to play a video that we put together from Zero Waste Scotland. It's a message not just to the people of Scotland, but a message to the rest of the world about the challenges and the opportunities that we think we have in terms of addressing climate change. So, play the video. Scotland and other parts of the world have declared a climate emergency. Global emissions are destroying our planet, and if we carry on as we are, it's going to get worse. That's our message to Scotland. But as we tackle one of the biggest challenges of our generation, there's one vital part of the conversation missing. If we're serious about ending our contribution to climate change, we need to rethink how we consume, both here in Scotland and around the world. And that's something all of us need to be involved in.
Around 4/5 of Scotland's carbon footprint comes from the products and materials we manufacture, use and throw away. The average Scot consumes 18.4 tonnes of materials every year. Academics agree that a sustainable level of material use is about 8 tonnes per person per year. We need a system-wide change that enables us all to choose more sustainable ways to live, use the things we need and share resources. This is what's known as a circular economy. Through it, we can maximise value from the goods we already have in circulation, while relieving pressure on finite natural materials like oil and precious metals. We know that adapting to a circular economy can and does work for everyone, delivering an improved bottom line for business and offering a more sustainable way of life for citizens. For many years, Zero Waste Scotland has been working with businesses and leaders across Scotland to do business differently by finding more circular ways of working. Businesses like Indy Nature, who produce construction materials from hemp instead of petrochemicals, products that can be reused and repurposed at the end of their usable life, maximising value from waste and creating a sustainable circular solution. Indy Nature received funding from Zero Waste Scotland's Circular Economy Investment Fund and are setting up a manufacturing hub in the Borders, growing its workforce to 30. Businesses like Beauty Kitchen, who progressed from selling products in repurposed plastic packaging to launching their return, refill, repeat service, reusing stainless steel bottles to eradicate single-use packaging. Beauty Kitchen received help from our Circular Economy Business Support Service and is now pioneering refill stations with supermarket Asda and global brand giant Unilever. Businesses like Windswept Brewing and Maclean's Highland Bakery, who with the support of Zero Waste Scotland, work together to develop a sustainable new cracker made from waste from the brewery. These are today's success stories and tomorrow's normal. Zero Waste Scotland is working with communities and businesses across Scotland, helping to reimagine the way we live, work and travel. By working together, we have a huge opportunity to accelerate our circularity and to change Scotland and the world for the better. In a circular Scotland, every job will become a green job, from hairdressing to manufacturing and hospitality. Our children will learn about sustainability at school and beyond. The current workforce will be upskilled as part of our transition. We'll have an infrastructure that supports sustainable travel options like car clubs and city cycle schemes. Hybrid working will reduce the demand on office facilities, allowing us to utilise shared office space and make better use of redundant buildings. Our homes and offices will be part of a green heating network. We'll buy things to last. High-quality products manufactured locally will be in circulation for longer. investing in Scotland's jobs and skills and allowing products to be reused and resold time and time again. Leasing and rental will also be an option for things like clothing, toys and tools. Repair cafes will help us maximise the value of the products and materials we use to make them last as long as possible. Refill shops will reduce the need for single-use packaging and help us buy what we need, reducing food waste. Our buildings will be adaptable and have material passports, allowing effective recovery of materials that can later be reused. Localised food production will create sustainable environments, using less resources and more reliable crop production. Byproducts will create opportunities and prevent waste. And businesses will adopt sustainable procurement principles and invest in circular goods and services.
Each of us has a vital role to play in tackling climate change, and it starts now. No, that better. Apologies. So Zero Waste Scotland is the Scottish Government's, or Scotland's experts in the circular economy and resource efficiency. And we have been working with a whole host of companies, over 240 different companies in Scotland to identify circular opportunities. We've invested in the region of £12 million in many of those companies, not just, and at the same time leveraged around £36 million of private investment into those companies as well. The circular economy is very much alive in Scotland, and there's a great appetite from those individual businesses and a lot of the cities and regions that we're now working with as well, looking at solutions, looking at direct strategies that are going to not just help deliver on climate change, but possibly more important, increase economic opportunities through jobs, through creating more resilient supply chains within the Scottish economy. So it's very important on a number of fronts. But we also recognise that the circular economy is really about how do we reduce our consumption and make consumption much smarter in terms of the raw materials that we use. And unfortunately, we don't quite see as much conversation about that potentially here at COP26. Quite rightly, there's a lot of effort to decarbonise electricity, decarbonise energy, thinking about transport, thinking about investment in new ways of agriculture, etc. But we really do need to start thinking about consumption. If we're serious about reducing our impact, we need to think differently about our consumption, both as individuals, both as businesses, both as local authorities, all the way through the supply chain. So what we'd like to do is talk to some people who know all about this, probably know a lot more about it than we do at Zero Waste Scotland, both from a high level, both from working with other parts of the supply chain here in the UK, from individual citizens, as well as an international sense of what's happening in terms of consumption. We really do need to think differently about our consumption going forward. So I'm going to introduce them very briefly. We've got Marcus Gover from RAP, looking from a UK perspective. We've got Jack Barry from the Chatham House, and we've got Davina, forget your second name, Davina, from the African Development Bank, who's got an international perspective. And we've got Laura Young, who is a climate activist who really understands that broader picture and how important it is to raise our game. This isn't just about making electricity differently. This is a whole different opportunity that we need to really seize. So I'm going to let you all just say a few more words about who you are, a bit of the focus that you're involved in terms of changing the way that we consume. Marcus.
So, thank you, Ian. I'm Marcus Gover. This is difficult. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, good. Hello, everybody. I'm Marcus Gover. I'm the Chief Executive of RAP. We're very much partners with Zero Waste Scotland, work in very similar ways, aimed at delivering the circular economy and everything that comes with that. Now, as the video showed, as Ian has said, when we listen to people speaking here at COP26, we hear about energy, we hear about decarbonising fuels, energy reduction, we don't really hear about the products and the food that we use to live our lives. And as the video also said, about 45% of greenhouse gas emissions are down to that. Governments are focused on those big territorial emissions changes, but actually businesses and us, consumers, people, we're probably more focused on the products that we use. Now, the businesses are selling those products to us, which gives us great power as consumers, because we can use those products differently. We can avoid food waste. We can also make our clothes last much longer. And food itself is around about, so between 30 and 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions is down to the food system. So if we don't get that right, we're never going to get there. Clothing is around 8%, 10%, big number still. And that's what we need to focus on. Businesses are doing that. We have voluntary agreements, is one word, business collaboration programs, but working in plastics, food, and clothing. We have an agreement called the Quartile Commitment, which brings together, in fact, businesses who put 95% of the food on the tables in the UK. And if they change, then you change the system, and it's system change that we need. And that's how we work, trying to change the players in the system to change the system. The same with clothing. We bring together most of the players that supply our clothing in the UK, and they're adopting bold targets. Both of them have said that they will halve the carbon footprint of the food on UK tables and the clothing that we buy by 2030. That would put them on a trajectory to 1.5 degrees. It would put us playing our part on the trajectory to 1.5 degrees. So it's really about everybody playing their part, governments putting the right frameworks in place, businesses stepping up, but also us as consumers playing our part. And that's where others can help us to do the right thing, which I'm sure we all want to do.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Davina, I wonder if you wanted to come in and just talk about, I mean, obviously I could talk about Scotland, Marcus could talk about UK, but from an international perspective, how much attention is that whole consumption challenge actually resonating on a more kind of global scale, particularly from an Africa, obviously, which is your area of expertise?
Well, yeah, thank you so much.
I meant to say it's quite difficult to have the things on at the same
I
time.
was just getting my echo. Right, yeah, thanks, and thanks for the invitation. And well, indeed, I guess from us, we look at it differently. On the circular spectrum, we are on the other stick, the other side of the stick, looking at no production, almost low consumption. But as our cities grow, we have mega cities that are also coastal cities that you're beginning to see a lot of marine litter, especially plastics. But that is also coming from a very low industrial base. So the kind of issue that Scotland is dealing with today, overconsumption, overproduction, is the reverse on our end. We are looking at circular economy from low base of production, some minimum consumption, and what needs to be done is, as the production and consumption ramps up, we don't have to retrofit, that we build sustainable solutions. If I may, 80% of Africa's infrastructure needed to 2050 is yet to be built. And so there's an opportunity there to build smarter and also to have lifestyle changes, because 1.3 billion Africa's population will be living in cities by 2050. So there is an opportunity there, and an opportunity for the private sector to get involved now and to entrench circular practices. Now, circular practices are very predominant in the African social system because, again, the need. There's little production, so you are by nature going to recycle what you wear and how you use whatever resources you have. But technology is changing. What we used to know how to recycle, a natural fiber, is no longer the predominant resource. What we are seeing is dumped cars on the continent that we don't know much. We are not the engineers of those cars. So we really don't know how to take those parts apart and put them in productive use again. So it's all about how do we have a global coalition around sustainability use in terms of production and consumption, even for regions like ourselves that are yet to get to that optimal space. Thank you.
No, that's really interesting. So it's a common challenge, but the starting point is quite different. But I guess so it's interesting you talk about that 80%, because I know I read that even globally, the infrastructure that's required for us all to meet those net zero targets that everybody's talking about by 2050, 70% of that infrastructure hasn't been developed yet globally. So we're talking about all of the, electric vehicle charge points, the transport systems, even some of the buildings, and that fits into obviously, the SDG goals that we're all looking to, thinking about, improving sanitation, education for people around the globe. So it's about tackling that inequality, but 70% of the infrastructure we all want to see by 2050 hasn't been. So what materials are we going to need, want, use, and how are we going to design and build for that? So I'd be just good, Jack. I mean, you were speaking just the other day about some of the real, I guess we'll start with the challenges, but we did start to talk about some of the opportunities, and again, why the circular economy is so important, why the ideas around design and thinking differently, rather than just thinking, well, technology is going to fix this, because we're going to have to think about this. Do you want to just explain a little bit more about some of those challenges, Jack? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Jack Barry from Chatham House. And I think the really, really key point is the takeaway from my perspective around COP is, doesn't matter, if we get to net zero by 2050 and we have 100% renewables, we're still going to be consuming millions and millions and millions of tons of resources. And where are these resources coming from? Most of them, a huge amount of them, particularly for the net zero transition and all the wind turbines we need, electric cars, everything, are mined in low income and middle income countries. And just to give you a perspective, if we were to just to try and transition to net zero under our current energy demand, if we're just switching out of demand now for renewables, well, the International Energy Agency estimated that critical raw material demand would go up, just mineral demand would go up 600% by 2040. And you think 600% is a lot. Well, you break it down into specific materials, lithium goes up by 4,000%. Nickel and cobalt go up by 2,500%. These are astronomical rises. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to just try and match the amount of energy we're using with renewables, or do we want to be much smarter and actually reduce our energy demand in the first place, which therefore has huge impacts on our raw material demand? And just a few points on why it's important that we tackle this. When you think about there's environmental, social, and economic costs associated with all the minerals we need for these net zero technologies. Take the environmental impacts. The obvious ones being mining, strip mining, pit mining. Obviously, you clear the earth, you've got habitat loss, you've got air and water pollution, but perhaps even worse, you've got these tailing ponds, and tailing ponds are produced essentially toxic sludge that comes out of the mines when you're refining and you're processing the ores down into more useful material. And that toxic sludge has all sorts of toxic chemicals in it, but also radioactive chemicals, thorium, for example, which if you ingest causes pancreatic cancer and a whole range of other health issues. And there's been multiple cases around the world of these tailing ponds, not only polluting local water courses, pushing local communities out, and I'm sure you've got examples, Davina, as well. But when they fail, they can flood entire valleys and pretty much render them useless in terms of biodiversity and safe water. So you've got environmental issues on the mining side, but also huge amounts of energy used to convert these ores and minerals into actual useful pure lithium and nickel and cobalt, which we can put in our batteries. Most of those are processed in countries that are coal-fired powered. So you've got huge emissions associated with the production of these materials. Then you've got the social impacts. a lot of mining is very labor intensive, and not only is it very dangerous, but you know, when you look at cobalt, for example, which is predominantly mined in Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of these instances, they're artisanal mining, hand dug, with numerous cases of children being used to dig these holes and extract the cobalt with no protective equipment whatsoever, exposed to horrific risks. So there's social consequences as well, and that's not just for the people in the mines, it's also for the people who are protesting against those mines happening in the first place. So 50 of the 212 deaths last year from environmental campaigners were for mining. So it's one of the most dangerous topics to try and for environmental activism. So there's huge social challenges, and again, Davina's probably got a better grip than I do on this. But there are economic advantages in this, where it comes to the crux. You know, what happens if we become more circular? If Scotland or the UK or Europe becomes more circular, what does that mean? Well, it means our demand for critical materials from these countries goes down, and that potentially removes pretty essential taxes and jobs in these regions. So it's not a case of just trying to become circular in Scotland. It's about thinking about our impacts across the whole supply chain. And with that, the question is, what do we do? Well, of course, we have to reduce our consumption. Just cut me off, Ian, when my time is up. Of course, we have to reduce our consumption. The circular economy, you know, the video that Ian played is a perfect example. That will play a big role in reducing our consumption. But we need to get from 18 tons down to 7 or 8 tons to be sustainable. And that we're not going to achieve that through material sufficiency. We have to push for material sufficiency. And that's really talking about systems changes in our consumption. So not just making things last longer, but actually redesigning the systems of consumption, making our cities much more dense, so, and with free and very low cost public transport. So we don't even have to rely on buying electric vehicles in the first place, or building our buildings to be multi-use, so they can last for 200 years rather than 100 years, and we have to tear them apart and build new buildings. So it's really thinking about these really big opportunities that not only make society better for everyone, but also reduce impact. But to finish, that's what we do at home, but we have to think about our impacts abroad. So, you know, this 100 billion climate fund that we're struggling to get to, we need the equivalent of that for the material transition. We need to give a huge ton of financing to low-income and middle-income countries to support them to build up the infrastructure that's not been built yet in a sustainable way, but also to mitigate the adverse impacts of our continued mining, to meet our net zero target, but also to make that mining much more sustainable and safe and fair. And that's the two things we really need to do. So that's quite long, but I'll stop there.
That was great. Thanks, Jack. And yeah, and it puts quite a few things into perspective in terms of the challenges ahead. So I guess turning to you, Laura, and you know, you've been hugely influential over the last couple of years, particularly around getting the people of Scotland, particularly, to think about plastics and the impact that the plastics have had, and how we need to change thinking, particularly around single-use plastics and a whole host of other material issues that householders and individual citizens have, you know, got, you know, beginning to be aware of and such like. So I guess I'm interested in your view about particularly what Jack has talked about, because these are big challenges, and we kind of do talk a lot about what's happening in Scotland, but the impact of, I mean, clothes, for instance of plastics, we all know, and even now, all of these minerals, critical materials that we're going to need for whether it's electric vehicles or charging points or anything, they're all coming from outside of Scotland. So how do we ensure that the people of Scotland are aware that this isn't just about what happens here in Scotland anymore? This is a global issue, and we need to start thinking differently about how we consume, you know, and both in terms of reducing our consumption, but more importantly, thinking smarter about what we've already got and how to make the most of it.
All right, that was a huge question. I'm not really sure what part of your essay to go for first, but I guess, yeah, I'm here on behalf of the individual. I guess that's what my role is here. I don't know if anyone else feels like me, but you just feel frustrated. Like as a consumer, you're kind of just stuck in a system that's not working for you. And I just speak to like regular people every day who are like annoyed at the choice that they have in the supermarket. They're annoyed that recycling is not the answer and it's confusing and it's complicated. And I don't know how many arguments I've had to like break up over what bin something goes into when really it actually doesn't matter because we are just producing so much waste. I guess I'll just pick up on a few things that have been said. You know, I think so we all have this fancy free travel pass while we're here. I've not had to use my car once since this conference has been on. So I'm from Glasgow, so like I'm not coming very far, but you know, I've not had to use my electric car. I've got an electric car since being here. I want to give up my car. I don't want to have a car. It's not something I should need to have. But public transport normally is not as good as it is. I mean, it's free right now, but it's expensive. You've got to get different tickets. You don't always get to the same places. So actually, the conversation about public transport is a conversation about consumption because I have a car that I don't use all the time. You know, there's crazy stats about the amount of time our car actually just sits. You know, it's like 95% of the time or something, our car just sits on our driveway. You know, we don't use it. And so, you know, the conversation around being circular is also a conversation about really reducing it. But I think the main thing for me, and I think this is where people's awareness has come in, because one of the things, I think Davina kind of touched on it a little bit, but, you know, one of the things for me, the reason I care really about waste is because actually it's a justice issue. Our waste globally up until recently has been shipped all around the world. So not only do we mine countries for our own benefit and exploit them for their natural resources, we then also ship off all of our waste once we're done with it. And this isn't just plastic and recycling, it's also, you know, clothing donations that end up on the African continent, never being used and impacting local communities there. And so it is also like, it's a really colonial broken system that we need to get out of. And I think it's our responsibility as one of the richer nations to be deciding to really cut that. And I think that's something that we need to have in mind. And I'm really glad Davina's on the panel today to give that global perspective as well, because that's really what this issue is about. You know, kind of fill up our own landfills, that's fine. But when we start impacting the rest of the world, that's when I think individuals really care. But yeah, I definitely think my work has been around education of people around the options that they have and the things that they can do, you know, sharing about the different, you know, a shampoo bar or a bamboo toothbrush. But at the end of the day, that's a drop in the ocean of what we need to do. I guess the reason I do still do all of that and do believe that individuals can make a change is because to influence brands to decide to cut their plastic, you need enough people asking for it. You know, in that video, I think we saw there was that great Scottish brand who are doing the refillable Persil and different things. That's in one shop in Asda in Scotland, right? It's in one supermarket. So that is great, but it's in Tory Glen Asda if anyone wants to go and see it. You know, let's not kid ourselves on that that's the solution yet, but that is where we need to go to. And so I think we just need to really jump into it straight in and say, let's do that, but let's go full whole hog. Let's not do a trial in one Asda in one place, but let's actually roll it out and take away the options because we've not got there quick enough. And I think, you know, we've done great with micro beads and toiletries and plastic cotton buds, but we need to go much further and we don't have enough time. And I think that's why it's really, we need to talk about this with a lot of urgency. And actually, I've been pretty chuffed at the conference here. Like, we've got steel water bottles, we've got these cups, like that's a really good initiative, but let's hope that doesn't just happen because this is COP. Like, let's roll that out. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously we're going to have good systems in here, but how can we roll that out into other spaces? And if you've been into the city centre, everyone's walking about with disposables. How do we really deal with that? And how do we push past that? So I guess that's some of my rambling thoughts.
No, thanks, Laura. And I guess that maybe going back to Davina about your experience, because I'm anecdotally, obviously, but I was in Indonesia a couple of years ago, and you know, talking to them about the circular economy as part of an EU kind of mission. And when you kind of went there and said to them, "So how can we help you?" You know, the first thing they said was, "Don't send us your plastics," you know, because we have enough plastics. The second thing was very clear as well, that they weren't they weren't as much interested in what we were doing in terms of dealing with the issues around plastics particularly. They were more interested in what we were trying to do, i.e. what was the technology, what was the behaviors we were they wanted to leapfrog to some extent. And I'm interested in even from an African point of view, is our countries in Africa looking at, are they looking at the rest of the world like the UK and thinking, oh my God, we don't want to end up there. How do we get in front of the curve and make sure that we don't, we learn some of the lessons, some of the negative lessons, I guess, to where we are in terms of consumption, and really, move forward at pace.
Just to be honest, maybe a lot of them will look and say, can we even get the basics? Can we get, we have unelectrified homes, 600 million Africans don't have electricity. And so we are still at access levels. We are not yet on the excess. And so that is a challenge. But in the looking forward, when you look into the country's NDCs, you see that they're all pointing towards waste management because it's an urban problem. Because the cities are growing in a very unsustainable, unplanned way. And so that is an immediate challenge in all the cities across Africa. You will see plastic flowing on the streets. And besides being a pollution problem, it is also a challenge even for the farms, because oftentimes you have cattle eat the plastic and the cattle die, stuff like that. And because there's no collection systems. That's an immediate problem. But again, we come at it from the need side, that this conversation is yet to mature because we still don't have industry that would drive all these processes. But because we don't have it, we also don't want to do it in a very unsustainable way. What we've seen create the problem that you're dealing with, the excess problem. And so what are we doing at the African Development Bank? We host Africa's Circular Economy Alliance, first to create the awareness, and two, to find a platform that anchors best practices. So the Africa Circular Economy Alliance is hosted at the African Development Bank to foster good practices, to tailor Africa solutions. Because when I see that video, I almost, well, it's Scotland, very few do I recognize in terms of processes. And so we want to have solutions that are tailor-made and towards the whole value chain, because we have isolated interventions. One, we have a very ingenuitive youth. We have a youthful population that is coming up with all sorts of innovations. Just today, we were having an award system that has of young entrepreneurs that are doing all sorts of innovations, whether it's in agriculture, on waste management, even on digital solutions. And so what we want to do is to anchor those solutions and create incubations or acceleration programs to scale up, because the issue is about scale and size and also traction. Because we have a base of many young people doing small little businesses that are not scaled up. And so what we want to do at the bank is to find business solutions that scale up those interventions. Thank you. The other thing that I will add is much as I say that we have 600 people without power, we also have innovated around solar energy. We have, you may know that the largest concentrated solar plant is in Morocco. And we're now looking at generating a solar plant across the entire Sahara Desert, 11 countries, that would serve 120 families with power. And that would generate 10 gigawatts of power from the Sahara Sun alone as a renewable resource. Thank you.
Marcus, you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just listening to both of you speak, I wanted just to try to make sure we stay optimistic. And I know you were both being optimistic, but we could all think this is terrible and what are we going to do? And I think we can do things. You know, a lot of these solutions are better. So, for example, these jeans are guaranteed to last as long as I do. And I guess the question is, you know, which will last longer probably now. But there are new models that people are thinking about, and that reduces the impact of these enormously. If I just buy one pair of jeans, that makes a huge, huge difference. And the supply chain for these reaches way beyond national borders. The dyeing processes, the cotton processes are causing a lot of problems. But if we do it better, and these would be a lower impact cotton, that makes a huge difference. And I'm seeing more and more businesses wanting to do that, which is really very positive, I think. The other thing is that, you know, other areas like transport, for instance, my last meeting was near Maryhill, which is sort of a little way out. To get here by train was very challenging because there aren't many trains. The best way to do it was by bicycle. I have a little Brompton fold-up bicycle, and that's the most amazing way of getting around. I do it really because it's so nice, rather than necessarily it's an environmentally good thing to do, which it is. But that was a nice little cycle down a little river to get here. Very, very pleasant. It hasn't rained this week yet, which I'm amazed by, I have to say, but it's been lovely. And but a lot of these things are a better world, and we can do it, and we are doing it. And I think we've got to encourage people to demand that, because the businesses want to listen. This morning I was at a sort of business leader briefing that WWF ran, and I heard Dave Lewis, who's their chair, talking about one of the things that drove him when he was head of Tesco was that he said, well, what would his customers want them to do if they knew what he knew? And I think that's a very powerful way of thinking, because his knowledge of his supply chain and everything that they're doing, and saying, right, if you knew all of that, what would you want? And that sort of strong values of leadership, I see more and more. And I think we need to bring that out.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. And I do agree. We need to be really positive, because I think there are huge examples. Certainly, we know from businesses we work with in Scotland, and I know from RAP UK level that businesses are certainly beginning to address this, or certainly beginning to consider what, you know, this actually looks like going forward in terms of the circular economy. How do they reduce their own consumption, their supply chain? How do they build resilience, etc.? And, you know, look, you know, some of that is pressure from ourselves as citizens. Some of that's pressure from the supply chains. I also think possibly some of them are not willing too much to tell the story at the moment, because they don't actually know the impact they're having on their supply chains, because they know who they're buying from, but they don't know who that person's buying from all the way down the line. And that transparency of supply chain is something that, you know, I think most businesses really need to get, you know, are starting to get a grip of. So it's hugely, yeah, I mean, I can see the shift. Certainly we can see that happening. I guess we need to scale up a lot of these opportunities. So I'm interested in, you know, it comes back to the points that Jack was making. You know, we've all got these plans for wind turbines, infrastructure, but unless we're scaling up those circular economy opportunities, we're going to use up even more and more resources, more and more lithium, more and more of those things, and dig ourselves deeper into that, you know, both economic, environmental and social, you know, impacts around the world. So so on the bright side, what can we do? How can we really scale up both here at home within Scotland and the UK, but also in Africa? How can we really get this going? And even from a citizen point of view, Laura, what do you think, you know, going back to Marcus's point, if citizens knew what, to some extent, we know, what do you think we should be doing? So I'll start with Jack first.
Yeah, there's lots we can do. What can governments do? What can UK government do? What Scottish government do? Well, they can embed circular economy in public procurement. Scotland, I think, spends around 12 billion a year on public procurement. 10% of the GDP. It's absolutely massive. Huge amount of material consumption. You can embed circular economy in that, and you'd have a huge impact. But I wanted to pick up on the point that Laura was making, because I think it's really important. What things can we do to deal with our waste trade? So, and I think it's a nuanced grey area. Yes, we export waste, and a lot of the time it ends in the wrong places, causes pollution elsewhere. But if in some cases we need to export that to areas which have the processing capacity and scale to make it economically feasible to actually remanufacture, reuse these components. And at the moment, there's just no traceability. So when we ship electronic waste abroad, you know, we don't really know where it goes. We can't really prove it, and it ends up being taken apart by some child somewhere. So there's a lot of amazing work going on around the world in terms of using new types of technology such as blockchain to validate and verify and track the shipment of our waste abroad and make sure that it's recycled in accredited facilities in other places. But there's a whole load of work that needs to be done between us and the countries we're shipping to make those systems work. And there's a whole load of work needs to be done in terms of global trading rules around the codes that are used for shipping goods. Because when we ship electronic goods, waste, we don't know whether that's toxic, hazardous e-waste or whether it's items that could be reused in a secondary market or whether it could be repaired, bringing jobs to the place that we're exporting it. We don't know. So there needs to be much better clarification, and that is coming down the line. These systems are being revised and it's going to evolve over the next couple of years. And that hopefully will bring a lot of light, and it will help the Scottish government track illegal waste. It will help individual citizens be able to know with confidence where all their waste is going. And I think once we get those fundamental platforms in place and data platforms, a lot of the solutions then we can start building on.
Before Laura steps in, I mean, it's, yeah, a valid point. For years, I've always thought we need something like fair waste. You know, we have a thing called fair trade. You know, we're all very conscious of that, and you could argue that fair trade is, you know, all the big supermarkets, you know, the only coffee and chocolate they sell has all got fair trade on it. You know, we're all very aware of the transparency of how that is and supporting, you know, the people who grow the coffee, etc. So maybe that's, you know, we need something that says fair waste. You know, where does our waste come from? How do we make sure that people are, you know?
Well, I would raise that bar again, Ian, and say not fair waste, but fair trade in secondary materials and goods.
Okay, I was just looking for that. I was just looking for that kind of statement there, you know?
And not shipping our waste.
I know. Fair resources then, or fair deployment. Laura, would that help? Something like that?
Well, you could raise it even further and just say zero waste. I mean, come on, stick with the branding. I don't know. I probably did come across a wee bit negative in my first answer, but I think it is so important that we, when talking about waste, remember all of it, like the global perspective, because often we do think kind of too granular and think too much about Scotland. But there is actually so much that we can do as individuals. And I think the really positive thing is that it's about just creating a bit of a culture change and a culture shift. Some of my favorite people to talk to about this are my grandparents, because they are just like, right, let me tell you about how it used to be done, and can kind of, actually there's been a lot of intergenerational, you know, information around this. So they were, you know, chatting about how they used to get a lot of food, and my grand's been teaching me, I'm not that good at it, but like to sew and to like look after my clothes. And there's been a lot of skills that have been lost from being thrifty. And I think that's one thing. It's about education. It's about passing it that way. But then it's also about going the other way, which is, I was talking to my gran about recycling your phone, you know, once you've finished with it. And my gran, and this is a real gap that we need to address, is my grandparents are petrified of being hacked. You know, like they are absolutely scared of the internet and don't really, you know, and it really worries them to give away a piece of technology, even if you say it's totally safe. And I said, look, I'll walk you through how to recycle your phone, and we can like sign up to it, and I'll work it all out. And then she said, oh, hold on a minute, actually, I think some of my friends might want to know too. And I kid you not, she turned up with a bag of 20 phones and went, so I went round to the church and all the wee old people have brought their old phones. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But it really shows that there's an educational gap of like, what do we do with our resources and how do we get rid of them? But on an individual level, it's about changing your lifestyle. And I think education is key. It's about saying, there is only one Asda refill in Scotland, but let's share it about it and get people to use it. And hopefully more people will go and it'll become more popular. Let's educate around how we can remove waste from our own life and shift that around. And even just like as an individual, you know, coming to COP, that was quite an exciting thing for me. My first urge was like, oh, I can go and get 2 weeks worth of new outfits. And then I thought, no, that's so stupid. I've got plenty of clothes at home. It's, you know, it's even just training yourself. even as an individual, one of the most powerful things I did was delete my Amazon account. I would highly recommend it. It's absolutely amazing. Cut the ties. But actually it's just about retraining yourself to think about consumption, and kind of about sharing some of these great initiatives that are out there. And it's just about making them a bit more normal. And I think that's a really positive thing, because I do think a lot of this change is coming. We just need to get there a bit quicker.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. So education is, raising awareness. I guess my probably my final question before I open it up is there more we could be doing around educating, both in the formal setting but raising awareness? I mean, I'm looking at you, Laura, because you do that anyway through your kind of influencing, etc. But I'm always, there's always a chat. Well, we need to get into schools. We need to do something. But because of this, we need to do this within 10 years. We don't almost have enough time to wait for all of the children we're trying to educate to come up. So how else can we get the awareness raised, in civil society, both here and in other parts of the world?
I think it's a really hard question, because I think we need education at every level. Like, kids are growing up understanding about recycling and understanding about materials much more than adults are. But I think we need it across, every day I'm talking to people about the confusion around recycling, about the confusion of even materials like greenwashing, what is sustainable, what's not sustainable. I've had, maybe this is a controversial view, I hope it's not, but for example, I had this cafe that said, we've gone fully compostable vegware. Isn't that fantastic? And I thought, it's better, but it's not quite there yet. And actually there's more steps that we need to do. But I think it needs to be education everywhere. But I think that's why we need to really be pushing for circular, because I think the confusion and the education is all that grey area in between. There's no confusion with these cups. You pick it up and there's a clear bin where you put it. And that's a really easy distinction. But when you suddenly have different materials and different processes, that's where it gets confusing. And I think we need to just cut out that whole middle step and just go to that reusing circular economy that we are trying to aim for. But it needs to be everyone. Everyone needs to be educated, because it needs to be the people who are running cafes, the people who are running businesses, the people who are in school. Everyone needs to be learning about this stuff. And that's hard.
Okay. Thank you. I'm conscious about time. So is there any? Yes, we have a question. I don't know how this works. David Somerville.
I was intrigued by your clip where we were seeing a harvester harvesting the hemp from the borders. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that. And I'm interested in that because I was on Mull earlier this year, and the architect friends who's built their own house overlooking Tobermory, made out of cross-laminated timber. We've got lots of timber in Scotland, but this came from Spain. And he was having to cover it in plastic because the wood fiber insulation was on a 6-month waiting list. It's so popular. Now, can we get that sort of business happening in Scotland? That's the question.
That's the question. So the company that is represented in the video, a company called Indy Nature, is a Scottish company. We've one of the companies we've supported, and it is growing, hemp to provide insulation. So they're at the quite at the startup stage. They've developed a product. It is available, but they're obviously now trying to scale up. So we've invested in them. They've also secured a significant loan from the Scottish National Investment Bank to create a manufacturing platform in the borders. So they are going to be doing that. There'll be, as far as I know, the hemp will be grown in different locations around the country, but they'll be processing that into. So absolutely, that will be more available, but it's at that kind of startup, scale up stage. But it's interesting you say about that for housing, because we obviously, I guess one of the opportunities for the circular economy is dealing with the supply chain challenges that we currently have, because of some of that is, the economy, our economy, is the whole world economy. We could talk about Brexit and, supply chain issues and challenges. And we're seeing that within the construction sector at this moment in time, and provision of other products. And I know that's something that we've been talking to the Scottish Government about, how we could start to use more circular opportunities to both provide those raw materials back into the construction industry and create much more resilient and more integrated supply chains with the materials that we have. But ultimately, instead of building new, is refurbishing and and all of that sort of stuff. So yes, it is happening. So in some respects, I'd say quite a lot of the work that we've been doing in Scotland is absolutely, people recognise the climate challenges, that the circular economy can address, and the social things from a global point of view. But quite a lot of the interest, I think, is coming through because of the economic, the jobs, the resilience, particularly because of what's happened over the last 18 months and the kind of geopolitics and obviously recovering from COVID. So yeah, unfortunately, maybe your colleague, your friend is going to, needs that now, but that material will be available soon in Scotland. So there's a couple of other questions.
Thank you so much. And it's really interesting to see actually that we're having a conversation at COP around circular economy. What I wanted to ask about is, so at the organization that I work for called Generation Climate Europe, we've been advocating at the European level to introduce reduction target for consumption. So really moving beyond understanding a circular economy as just recycling and reusing. But something that we've noticed is that even though there's been a lot of momentum around circular economy at the EU level, a lot of decision makers tend to be, let's say, allergic the moment they hear, reducing, degrowth, post-growth, and this kind of conversation. So I wanted to ask you, what are your views on how can we make sure that we advocate not by showing the importance of reducing our consumption, but also by showing the benefits on that, and how can we be really strategically approaching those advocacy objectives in that sense?
Okay, does everybody want to answer that? Marcus?
I mentioned the jeans, which is a way of reducing consumption. So if I only need half as many pairs of jeans or even fewer, that consumption's gone down. Obviously, they cost more to make like that. So for the seller, the business still works. But for me, I get a much nicer pair of jeans. So I think there is a win-win solution to be had here. And our challenge is to find those so that it's not about telling everyone you can't have things. It's about telling them this is better. And I think there are quite a few other examples of where we could do that. Some of the, we need to challenge some of the assumptions about other things as well, I work a lot with plastics and packaging, and really we want to remove as much as we can. At the same time, we don't want food waste. So it's really pushing it all the time. Where can we not have it without causing food waste? And there's a starting place, but we're constantly working to sort of change the research and understand, well, what would happen if you didn't have that, the cucumber with the shrink wrap on, for instance. Well, what would happen? And challenging that, and we'll keep doing that. So I think you need research to push things, but also to look for the win-win would be my answer.
Yeah, just to, I guess, pick up on your kind of meaning more kind of macro level decoupling targets that, well, as you'll know, the Parliament have been discussing that, and the EU is developing a financial taxonomy, a green taxonomy at the moment. And within that taxonomy, which is a list of green activities, economic activities with criteria set against them, they've got circular economy objective within that. And they've got a goal for that objective, which is 50% virgin material reduction by 2030, 75 by 2050. And so that idea is starting to percolate in, even though it's not an official piece of legislation. It's starting to percolate in different areas of European legislation. But your question of how do we sell it? I think it's more of a question of, well, what do we want out of the economy in Europe? What's the point of the economy? And it's not a question of whether we grow more or degrow more. It's what should we grow more to deliver and maximize well-being and prosperity for all. So we need to grow some areas, shrink other areas. So rather than just total degrowth, which is a very negative connotation, it's, do we grow education, public transport, renewable energy? Do we degrow extractive industries and polluting industries? And And I think if we start using that narrative around well-being and linking our consumption to that, we can get a bit more traction, maybe.
Just one more question, but just before go for that last question. So just a little bit of a plug. So on Monday, we are hosting another event outside of the Blue Zone with in the Scottish Government's hub, another Scottish Government's hub outside at the Lighthouse, where we produced a film. We're premiering a film, which is all about that, what Jack's was talking about. How do we decouple resource consumption from from the economic situation, and they will start to talk about that kind of idea of a well-being. What are we measuring? So if you're interested in that, please check our website out. It's in the evening, 5:30. But yeah, further discussions on that. We'll progress that in a little bit more detail. So anyway, final question, colleague. You've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Carlos. I work for a company in the United States called Bloom Energy, and thanks so much for your conversation. I love that story about the phones. I think I have like 5 or 6 iPhones that I said I was going to sell. They're still in my drawer. Don't know what to do with them. But my question is, and thank you so much for talking about this. I previously worked in New York. I don't know if you guys have environmental justice communities here, but in New York, where we certainly do, there's a lot of issues around just that, a just transition, environmental justice. How do we make non-extractive projects within a circular economy work? And, researching a lot about Scotland, I know that you guys are very interested in electrolyzers and green hydrogen for transportation, some for energy generation. So I'm wondering if any of you have any kind of experience in understanding that's role in Scotland's energy future, and if any ideas how that's going to kind of play into the goals of a circular economy.
Want me to answer that? I think so. Some of that is to some extent the crux of the issues that we potentially face. So we are working at Zero Waste Scotland. We're working with the energy sector, particularly looking at renewables at the moment. So that whole line of we want to develop that infrastructure here in Scotland. We've set our targets for increasing the renewables, whether that's wind turbines or otherwise. And all of the things, hydrogen is the next thing, electric vehicle charging. Well, what is the materials? Where are the materials going to come from? So we are working with those sectors on that. We've just recently released some reports, particularly looking at the wind infrastructure. How do we design, that so it can be refurbished, redeployed, remanufactured, repaired, as we start to go through the technologies, because that's one of the big concerns, that the technology and all of those things we're talking about, heat pumps or otherwise, they are going to accelerate. So what we're putting in place now, people are beginning to think, well, in 8 years' time, they're going to be upgraded. What are we going to do with that infrastructure going forward? And that goes back to Jack's point. Where are all those critical materials? But it's not just the lithiums, it's the aluminium, it's the cement, it's the steel that goes into all of that infrastructure as well. So we need to start seriously engaging with those industries. So we are running alongside that ambition to decarbonize. What are we doing? So we don't face the problems in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. So if you're interested, we can certainly put you in touch with a team who are looking at that. And it's something that as we dash to put all that infrastructure in place, let's design it right. Let's design it and build it in a way that we can, we don't having to keep going back to square one again with it. So absolutely. And if there's other countries in the world that are doing this already, please share, because it's certainly something that we don't have the absolute answer for, but we do recognize that it's something we need to work with. So happy to do it. So I'm very conscious of time. I'm getting the signal that we've probably gone over. So thank you again, everyone, for coming along and listening and participating. And if there's anything you want to follow up, please do. But I'd like to thank our esteemed panel for their inputs and coming along this afternoon on a Friday afternoon. But as I said, very important subject. So thank you, everyone. Unusual applause.